as a murder, a suicide, and the almost endless glorification of the name Mayerling. Mayerling was where our Prince Rudolf shot his young mistress, and then himself, in a lover's pact that was definitely a thumb in the nose at the Austrian royal family of the time. There was a hasty cover-up. That was in 1889. But in recent years, the Mayerling incident has become a romantic tale of thwarted love. That's the way Hollywood grabbed at it, twice. And Mayerling is cropped up like that on stage and on television, gently pleading for its unhappy lovebirds. But in 1968, when Kenneth MacMillan choreographed a full-length ballet called Mayerling, he didn't flinch at the true story's darker aspects, including its rampant sexuality. Acts that are usually just suggested in classical ballet were now given vivid display, people touching each other in far from innocent ways, prolonged and serious kissing, which you often see in movies, but seldom in classical ballet. It was a big hit. And our program tonight is called MacMillan's Mayerling, and it documents not only Rudolph's history, but the creation of MacMillan's ballet. It presents performance highlights from Covent Garden, with Britain's David Wall performing as Rudolf, one of the most taxing male roles in ballet history, and the Canadian Lynn Seymour as his doomed lover, Mary Vetsera. Stalwarts from the Royal Ballet's great company, Michael Soames, Merle Park, and Georgina Parkinson, and a fascinating account of the bringing into being of a great performance.
The Royal Opera House, Covent Garden, London. Here in February 1978, the Royal Ballet performed the world premiere of a work danced to the music of Franz Liszt, based on one of the most bizarre and sensational episodes in the history of European monarchy. This program tells the story of how the ballet was made and the facts behind the by now legendary events on which it's based.
That would be very good.
The new work had been in the mind of its creator, Kenneth MacMillan, for more than 4 years.
Can you simulate drum roll?
And had subsequently been in rehearsal with members of the Royal Ballet Company for nearly a year, here in their studios at the Royal Ballet School in Barons Court, West London.
Is there a way of moving her that way and that way? It's terrible for you, isn't it?
MacMillan's new 3-act ballet was acclaimed by dance critics and audiences alike at Covent Garden as a significant achievement in the development of modern classical ballet.
It's even better.
It provided sensational new roles for established stars of the Royal Ballet, David Wall and Lynn Seymour. Mayerling is a thrilling, moving theatrical experience, said The Guardian. I would unhesitatingly recommend you to see this performance, said The Times, and went on, MacMillan has always been addicted to innovative, sometimes hazardous lifts and maneuvers. This time, even the most far-fetched inventions are well worth the fetching. Mayerling's first season at Covent Garden was an instant sellout. At its American debut in Los Angeles, it received a 20-minute standing ovation.
When I was much younger and started doing ballets, I was very influenced at that time by the ballets that were coming out of Paris. They were very fashionable, and they were mostly fantasy ballets. And one night I went to the Royal Court Theatre and saw John Osborne's Looking Back in Anger, was absolutely bowled over by it, and decided I wanted to break from the fantasy world into something more real.
MacMillan went to Vienna for his reality, to a true story that nearly 100 years after the event, respectable citizens prefer not to talk about, but a story that fascinates anyone with the slightest curiosity about the private lives of public faces. A scandal at court which shocked the world and rocked a dynasty that had ruled the country for more than 600 years, the House of Habsburg. Emperor Franz Joseph I had succeeded to the throne of the Austrian Empire in 1848. His wife, the Empress Elizabeth. They had 3 children. Their third child, an only son, the Crown Prince Rudolf, heir to the Habsburg throne. Emperor Franz Joseph ruled for 68 years and died in 1916, aged 86. But his only son and heir, the Crown Prince Rudolf, did not succeed to the throne of the Habsburgs. In 1889, at the age of 31, tormented by family conflict and political intrigue, venereally diseased and addicted to morphine, Rudolf shot himself. About 6 hours earlier, before committing suicide, the Crown Prince had, with her agreement, shot dead his 17-year-old mistress, Mary Vetsera. Crown Prince Rudolf is buried alongside his father and mother in the mausoleum of the Habsburgs in the center of Vienna. Mary Vetsera lies in a country churchyard 20 miles away. Mary Vetsera, born 19th of March 1871, died on the 30th of January 1889. Rudolf, heir to the throne of Austria and Hungary, born 21st of August 1858, died on the 30th of January 1889 at Mayerling. From his apartment in the Hofburg in Vienna, it was a journey of 16 miles to the Crown Prince's hunting lodge at Mayerling. Mayerling's a small village to the south of the city on the edge of the Vienna woods. After the tragedy, the Emperor Franz Joseph demolished the hunting lodge and a Carmelite convent was built there, but the memory of the tragedy at Mayerling is now written into history. To get at the facts and reveal the characters truthfully, Kenneth MacMillan collaborated with the writer Gillian Freeman.
It was easy to get at the earlier facts, more difficult to get at the end, because all Rudolph's effects were destroyed. In fact, Emperor Franz Joseph had all his papers put into a sealed sack, and when the sack was opened some 50 years later, it was found only to contain pieces of linen and old newspapers. So it is very difficult to know exactly what happened.
On the other hand, everything that is in the ballet, you would say, could be verified, in fact.
Yes, absolutely everything.
On the evening of the 28th of January 1889, with the aid of his friend and confidant, the cab driver Bratfish, Rudolf and Mary left Vienna secretly and rendezvoused at Mayerling. They'd chosen to die together. From Mayerling, Mary wrote to her mother, "Forgive me for what I've done. I could not resist love. I am happier in death than in life." In a letter to his wife, Stephanie, the Crown Prince, now dependent on morphine to control the pain of venereal disease, wrote, "I approach death calmly. It alone can save my good name." In the third and last act of MacMillan's Mayerling, the couple prepare for death together. This is the climax of the ballet. The death of the Crown Prince, heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was a royal tragedy. The combined suicide of himself and his young mistress was sensational and potentially disastrous for the continuation of the House of Habsburg. The twin-headed eagle of the Habsburgs, reigning over the dual monarchy of Austria and Hungary. 30 years earlier, Franz Joseph had brought them under the same crown and enforced the power of the Habsburgs in Europe. As a symbol of the strength of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Franz Joseph had rebuilt Vienna around the royal palace, the Hofburg. It was in the Hofburg that Franz Joseph heard of the tragedy, and an eyewitness reports that he fell on the floor and writhed in pain and despair, no longer in a state of self-control. Then he realized the full implications of the tragedy. Not only the loss of his heir, but a murder and a suicide that could be interpreted as madness in the family. All this would cast doubt on the divine right of the Habsburgs to rule. The attempt by his father, the Emperor Franz Joseph, and the Prime Minister of Austria, Count Taft, to salvage the dynasty and cover up the more scandalous facts behind the tragedy made the event even more bizarre. It led to years of research and speculation, memoirs, myth-making, fact-finding, and romantic invention in films.
Years ago, I saw a film about Mayerling with Daniel Darieux and Charles Boyer, which was very romantic, and I cried a lot. And then about 4 years ago, I bought a book for my wife's birthday about the Habsburgs, and I read it first. And there was a lot in it about Mayerling, and it was completely contrary to the film I'd seen. It was completely unromantic, and it intrigued me, and that's how I wanted to do it.
Now a 32-year-old London-born dancer, David Wall, a member of the Royal Ballet Company since 1964, becomes the latest to impersonate the tragic Crown Prince Rudolf. The role of Crown Prince Rudolf is the biggest and most exacting ever created for a male dancer.
My main problem was, from the word go, I was scared of the actual fact that I was going to require so much stamina and strength actually to get through the ballet. I found myself doing things that I'd never done before as a person, let alone a dancer.
Since Nureyev defected from Russia, I mean, the male dancer has come into the fore. Always before, the ballerina role was the main thing. And now in England, we have some superb male dancers. And I wanted to do a ballet for a man.
MacMillan's Mayerling is in 3 acts. It relates some of the events leading up to the tragedy over a period of 8 years, starting in May 1881 on the day of the Crown Prince Rudolph's wedding. Rudolf is forced by his father and the court to make a political marriage to one of the few eligible princesses in Europe, Princess Stephanie of Belgium. At the wedding reception, the Crown Prince, David Wall, and Stephanie, Wendy Ellis, lead off the dancing. They're followed by the Emperor Franz Joseph, Michael Soames, and the Empress Elizabeth, Georgina Parkinson. And then Countess Lariche, Mel Park, and her husband. Countess Lariche is to become instrumental in the tragedy, for she will make the fatal introduction to Rudolf of the girl who will die with him.
open a bottle of...
Now pull away. Even further.
Kenneth MacMillan is the principal choreographer of the Royal Ballet. He was born in Dunfermline in 1929, got himself to the Royal Ballet School, and at 17 became a founder member of the Sadler's Wells Theatre Ballet.
Are you going to clinch? Do you have time to clinch there? I mean, by accident, nearly happened. Was lovely. You got her, and she was lying at that side. I mean, I knew it won't go until the next step, but if we could get that position. Time's going so quickly. You'll be holding. You're on point. Développé forward. Now, if you could just take that leg and go whoop. See, do, and D.
MacMillan was himself a fine classical dancer, particularly noted for his leaps.
Yes, I wonder if when you went forward, you straightened the leg and back. No, back to the attitude, because you know you're in an attitude.
Yes, certainly.
So as he goes forward, you straighten it, come back to attitude, straighten.
Okay.
His first choreography dates from 1953.
You see, I can take you further.
His first partnership with Lynn Seymour took place in 1958 with The Borough, based on the Diary of Anne Frank. In 1960, he created a stunning interpretation of Stravinsky's Rite of Spring. His 1965 production of Romeo and Juliet is regularly performed in repertory. Anastasia heralded his period as director of the Royal Ballet, succeeding Sir Frederick Ashton in 1970. His lively Elite Syncopations was premiered in 1974 to be followed by the tragic three-act ballet of The Story of Manon. His ballet Requiem, which was premiered by the Stuttgart Ballet in 1976, was introduced to British audiences earlier this month. Kenneth MacMillan's work as a choreographer has been followed over the years by the ballet critic of the Financial Times, Clement Crisp.
MacMillan is, in a sense, a beautiful erotic poet in movement. His pas de deux always explore a very strong sexual relationship.
Just show me the position again.
MacMillan's concern has always been with the psychology of the characters, with the dramas, the tensions that impel them forward. He acts as a kind of analyst to his characters. He forces them into certain situations where they have to behave in a specific way. And he then shows us everything they feel in beautifully expressive movement. But it is movement which nevertheless stems from the classical tradition and really does have to do with classical ballet as such.
There's so much padding in the 19th century ballet. I mean, it's usually about thwarted love. The characters are very one-dimensional. It's a man and a woman in love and someone tries to break it up. And that's really the storyline. And it's padded out with endless dancing. And I didn't want that. I wanted a complete narrative. And to not put any padding in, to make every movement mean something to the audience. I wanted the audience to be involved, so much so that when they went home, they still believed those characters existed.
At the heart of each act of a 19th century full-length ballet was a pas de deux, a duet which centered around the female star. For MacMillan, the action has been to turn this actually on its head, because he's made this ballet, which is a great central role for a male dancer. And we have not the expected 3 or 4 pas de deux that you have in the old ballets, but here we have, I think, no less than 7, which chart Rudolph's extraordinary relationships with the women in his life. In none of them is there any trace of love, not conventional romantic love. There is lust, there's despair, there's a kind of horrified passion. He reveals an enormous amount about himself, but MacMillan is also very clever, and he reveals a great deal about the women whom Rudolf is involved with. For none of them does he feel anything other than anger or despair or a weird sort of gratification of a fantasy. He seeks, I suppose, he is a true romantic in that he seeks an ideal love. Never once does he find it. It is corrupted, it is destroyed, because he has been a corrupted and destroyed character. The first part of it that we see is a very brief one, in which he flirts at his own wedding reception with his new wife's sister.
The Princess Louise is danced by Genesia Rosato.
We next move to a pas de deux with the Countess Lariche, who's been his mistress at one time and is now a kind of evil genius. But she's also the only woman throughout the ballet who really understands Rudolf. She understands his physical needs and, in a sense, something of his psychological needs. Their relationship starts almost as a sort of kind of companionship, but it gradually darkens because she is forever making fresh demands upon him.
The meeting of Rudolf and Countess Lariche is seen by the Prime Minister Count Taff, who will rush off to report it to the Emperor.
was a very unhappy man, trapped by the stiff Habsburg court.
What did you find out about his childhood and adolescence?
Well, he was a very unhappy child. His grandmother, the Archduchess Sophie, wouldn't allow his mother to have access to him, which made her go away more and more from the court. He had very harsh tutors. One of them, in fact, locked him in an enclosure and told him that a wild boar was coming to attack. The child was in hysterics. He was only 6 at the time. He was made to get up very early and stand in the snow to harden him. His mother had married at the age of 16. She'd had a very happy childhood, a very free childhood, and she was in love with Franz Joseph. But the minute she got to the court, she was dominated by her mother-in-law, the Archduchess Sophie. Franz Joseph almost immediately began to have affairs, which his mother condoned. Elizabeth was very unhappy and very lonely. When she had her first child, she was told by the Archduchess that she wasn't really fit to bring up children, so they were removed from her. Rudolf was her third child and her only son. She left the court more and more.
Was there any love between himself and his mother? Were there any confidences? Was there any trust at all?
Well, apparently, he was never able to speak to his mother alone. She seemed afraid of contact.
Rudolf, on his way to his wedding night, to the wedding bed, goes to see his mother. It's the classic Hamlet-Gertrude relationship that she is unable, through various psychological reasons, which MacMillan shows us in due time, she's unable to react to him at all. There is an extraordinary moment when he lays his head on her breast, and she raises her hands away from him as if she's reluctant to touch his head. She turns away from him with her hand on her hip. You see him how he inserts his head and his body as if to try and get back into his mother's arms. One of the most shocking and pitiable scenes.
Rudolf and his wife, with his parents and his in-laws, the King and Queen of Belgium. At first, Rudolf was delighted with the prospect of this marriage that had been arranged for him. But after a long engagement and 2 postponements, he changed his mind. On their wedding night, he terrorized his bride. This is the climax of the first act of MacMillan's Mayerling.
He was fascinated by guns and explosives all through his life, even from a little boy, and also fascinated by death. And to frighten his bride, he brought in a pistol and a skull. And after all, the girl was only 16 at the time. She must have been terrified. He had to produce an heir. He was trying to, you know, so he forced himself to go to bed with his bride. And that's the point I started from.
The arranger and conductor of the music for MacMillan's Mayerling was John Lanchbury.
Kenneth said the composers that you can use, according to the research I've done, are either Brahms or Bruckner or Mahler. And I said, no, you know who it should be, Kenneth, it should be Liszt. I went through the 12 orchestral tone poems of Liszt and the hundreds, well, thousands of piano pieces. I took a whole month just doing that, listening to the music alone. And Liszt is very, very much the right period, as a matter of fact. Liszt died just a few years before the Mayerling incident took place. Don't forget that at that time Austria and Hungary were really part of the same empire. Liszt, the great champion of the Hungarians, I mean actually the Hungarians figure quite largely in the story of Mayerling. And incidentally, there is in existence a picture painted of Rudolf, aged 17, with Franz Joseph the Emperor and the Empress Elizabeth, actually listening to a piano recital played by Liszt himself, which I think is a sort of magic tie-up with the composer.
Lanchbury's selections from Franz Liszt's work are often appropriate for their contemporary associations.
For example, the scene with Rudolf and his mother, the Empress Elizabeth, I found a suitable piece of music which Liszt had actually written for the wedding album of that very woman, the Empress Elizabeth. Rudolph's obsession with a gun was terribly important in this whole story, and actually the first theme I thought of, the opening of Liszt's Faust Symphony, which is a marvelous sort of mysterious... Kenneth wanted a scene in a sleazy, smoky tavern. Now, a piece that's sometimes known as Mephisto Waltz No. 1, Liszt actually composed as a scene in a tavern when the devil comes to tempt Faust in two scenes from Linnell's Faust, it's called, and it's usually, as I say, called the Mephisto Waltz. You know, that's... the devil tuning up his violin.
At the start of the second act, Rudolf has now been married for 5 years, and he's openly visiting the sort of tavern that gets raided by the police to see his old friend, the courtesan Mitzi Casper, danced by Laura Connor. compulsive promiscuity which comes out very well in the ballet. Is that true too?
Yes, it is true.
It's rather desperate. Well,
yes,
as
it
much
is.
Desperate as compulsive. Isn't it?
His sex education consisted of a visit to a fish breeding farm, and then he went to Paris, and I think got venereal disease almost instantly. Mitzi Casper, who was his mistress for a very long time, she was really a high-class prostitute, and when Rudolf was sent to Belgium to meet Stephanie, his bride, for the first time, he took Mitzi Casper with him, and she was lodged out in the town.
He controlled his venereal disease with morphine, didn't he?
Yes, more in the later years. But this is why he and Stephanie only had one child. And she also got venereal disease from him.
I find him a very sympathetic character, although he's debauched and, you know, he has syphilis and various other diseases. To me, the sort of basis of it all was his childhood, from the years, you know, when he was born until perhaps 17. I found that understanding those years of his life helped me very much to portray the reasons and the anxieties that he obviously went through in later life. The hardest thing, in fact, for me was not so much the debauched side of Rudolf and the syphilitic side, the drug addict side, but it was the sympathetic side that I found the most difficult, in fact, to portray to the audience, because the power of the pas de deux that Kenneth gave us sort of almost spoke for themselves. But the other side, the sympathetic side, was a side I very much wanted to put forward to the audience. And hopefully we've succeeded. I don't think the audience will go away thinking that he's a total monster. I hope they feel very sad for him.
A disastrously unhappy marriage, contempt for the court and his parents, political intrigue, physical and mental illness, all drove Rudolf to ask Mitzi Casper to die with him. She refused. At this moment, he met a 17-year-old Mary Vetsera. She was introduced to him by a former mistress, the Countess Marie Lariche. The Countess, unable to continue her own affair with Rudolf and be accepted at court, became a procuress, introducing girls to him and bringing them to his private apartment at the Hofburg. Mary Vetsera, Lynn Seymour.
I don't think there was much substance to her as a character. It's hard to say, I mean, how intelligent or anything she was. She was obviously totally single-minded, a terrific social climber, not altogether a sort of terrific person, I don't think. Very young and socially ambitious, and with a mother who was also the same. So she was, in many ways, she had no other choice to make other than these opportunities that were presented to her. And she obviously made the best of them by persuading herself that she was totally in love and completely infatuated and wanted to die for him. I think it's as simple as that, really.
At the age of 16, she'd already had an affair in Egypt and was sent back home to Vienna. So she wasn't a virgin when she met Rudolf. And I think she had very romantic, dramatic ideas. I think she was probably very theatrical. And the idea of dying with the crown prince, you know, was ecstasy for her. It was the ultimate orgasm.
It didn't always happen in the sequence that I put it in the ballet story. And I've used certain events and put them into another context. For instance, Mary Vetsera went to a fortune teller when she was about to have her affair with Rudolf. Well, I turned this into a telling of the cards by the Countess Lariche, who was the go-between for Rudolf and Mary.
Mary Vetsera had fallen in love with Rudolf some time before, but at a distance. Her mother, the Baroness Helene Vetsera, took Mary to every social event in the calendar in an attempt to get acceptance at court. They lived in an elegant rented townhouse in Vienna. Countess Lariche brought Mary to the Hofburg for the first time on the 5th of November, 1888.
When Rudolf and Mary Vetsera eventually come together, we see how she absolutely lives out immediately to his fantasies, since among her first actions is the seizing of the gown and the threatening with it. It is as if two fantasists meet and find that they share the same fantasy. This is the most explicit, erotic part of it he's ever written. It is also one of the most beautiful.
Yeah, coming down wasn't so good. No, I want you to let go and risk breaking your head. To go, No? You better do it now, you better do the whole roly-poly. Lynn, I want to get there by 9 and then go into your other position on 10, 11, 12. You see, you're doing it all in one. The thing about this scene, Lynn, you haven't seen the scene with him and his wife, who's complete opposite to you. I mean, she's terrified of him, and you're not a bit frightened. Completely the opposite. That's why he likes you. He's met his match.
Igor Stravinsky. He was at the height of his career when he embraced new challenges as a conductor and performer, and a new country in the raw, untamed expanses of America. Here he discovered audiences eagerly awaiting his musical genius. His fascination with ritual and sacred works grew, and his influence on American music continues to this day. On this, the 100th anniversary of his birth, CBS Cable presents the first comprehensive television biography of Stravinsky's life, including interviews with family and friends, and pilgrimages to the many places he lived and worked.
I had that big laugh.
The life, the legacy of the most influential composer of the 20th century, Igor Stravinsky. Tomorrow on CBS Cable.
There it was, the clarinet. I didn't want to play anything dull.
They also don't know what I've really...
MacMillan's Mayerling is, of course, the result of his collaboration with many other people.
Yeah. Can we just hold a second?
How important is it for you to work with people you know well?
Well, very important indeed. You know, when I go to other companies abroad, I get very, very nervous because I don't know the way people move. You know, I'm not used to the way they move or think. If I go to Germany, for instance, there's a language problem as well, you know.
And this gives you a lot of confidence working with the same people?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Do you know where we are?
We worked on it, I think, for probably 10 months. There was never, ever an element of doubt, which I enjoyed. Kenneth was very positive about the way he wanted the ballet to turn out. And consequently, it's been a very fruitful 10 months. And one, in fact, for me as a dancer, working with a choreographer, a period of time which has been really without too many problems, apart from the sort of technical problems, but the actual line that Kenneth wanted to follow, I felt I was following as well, naturally, as opposed to him having to implant in me what he wanted. We were sort of on parallel lines of thinking.
Instead of pushing her, so you see, from there, if you had a, could you do that?
MacMillan has worked with Lynn Seymour for 20 years.
The difference in working with Kenneth and anybody else that I've worked with is that he involves you in the actual process of creating. You're not just a pound of meat doing the steps that he tells you to. You're given the opportunity to contribute a great deal of your own self and your own thoughts and your own intelligence and everything else, which is terrific.
Once more. Your music.
It would be... No dancer can see themselves or see the effect that they create. It's only another pair of eyes that can do that. His are obviously very, very keen. He seems to find peculiar qualities in people that he likes and which he brings out very deftly and always, I think, successfully.
Well, let's try working out this, going into the right.
And you worked with the same designer, Nico Georgiadis, for
Yes.
a great number of years.
Yes. It's my first ballet, yes.
What was his reaction when you asked him to do Mayerling?
My God, how am I going to make a bustle work on the stage while you're dancing?
And how did he?
Oh, he did, very well. I mean, he got the silhouette of the period at the same time making them able to dance as well, which is, you know, a great feat.
Remarkably, the collaboration with his music man, John Lanchbury, took place by correspondence at a distance of 12,000 miles. Lanchbury is the conductor of the Australian Ballet.
Having worked out with Kenneth a blow-by-blow description of the whole thing in scenes and numbers and so on, and having agreed with him on the timing of it and the way each number looked, how its shape was, where its climax was, and so on, I then had to try and find, out of that welter of stuff I'd listened to, I had to match scene for scene. And when I was going through all the works, I did a sort of checklist, rather like a Michelin guide. I mean, 1 star, 2 stars, 3 stars. Letter T, marvellous romantic tune, gets too hysterical at letter V, and things like that. And I had welters of papers with descriptions of music. And I sent it to Kenneth, but with a fair amount of descriptions here and there. Scene change begins, musical interlude, royal exit, return of guests, interruption of pas de deux, and so on, so that Kenneth knew what I was about. And for safety's sake, since we were 12,000 miles away, I made every number a little longer than I thought necessary and marked where he could cut and gave him various sort of possible cuts, because it is really rather like having a suit made to measure. So I made the sleeves a little long and the back a bit too broad and so on. And Kenneth did put those cuts in, most of them anyway. And back came a most enthusiastic telegram from him. Amazed, delighted, wonderful first act. Can't wait for the second. Love, Kenneth.
What's the 9? What's that?
7, 9, 10.
How much more?
About 4/8 of the quick.
Some more slow?
And then some more slow, yeah.
Oh, yes, but they can
Just-
join me
yeah.
on the slow.
Just when they...
Yes.
Everyone leaves.
Sorry. Mark it from the first 8 and the 10.
How do you write for somebody to choreograph? What did you put on the page?
Well, I began with some general notes, and I included a photocopy of a drawing that Rudolf had done as a child, which was a man with a gun, shooting a bird which was falling apart in the air. He did that at the age of 10. Notes on the main characters that I felt were right for ballet. For instance, 2 characters which played quite a part in Rudolf's life were his valet, Loschek. Well, Loschek really had nothing to recommend him in terms of ballet. I mean, he waited on Rudolf, and he was there at the time of the suicide. And his cab driver, Bratfish. But Bratfish was immediately a character right for ballet. He was known as an entertainer in the kind of low dives that Rudolf went to. He was a whistler, in fact. I've suggested acrobatics to Kenneth as a substitute for whistling. Kenneth, in fact, sent Graham Fletcher to a circus to learn very dexterous tricks with a top hat.
To the back.
Excellent hat tricks. Very good.
Run, run.
Every detail of the work must be recorded so that there's an exact record for future casts and other companies. This becomes the Bible of the ballet. Jackie Hollander is the choreologist or dance notator.
We use Benish movement notation.
Basically, the notation is really built up of just 3 symbols. 1, meaning a limb level with the body. A vertical one, meaning a limb in front of the body. And a dot, meaning a limb behind the body. Now, depending on whereabout on the stave you put it, for instance, the other basic thing is that we look from behind the dancer. So if we had that, those would be 2 feet together, level. The bottom line denotes the feet, then the knees, then the waist, then the shoulders, then the top of the head. So you could, in fact, draw a little stick figure and show the extremities. So if we wanted to note, say he was looking to the left, if we wanted to notate that position, we'd have 2 feet level on the floor, 2 arms shoulder height, so between the waist and the shoulder, and the head is turned to the left.
This is the pas de deux where Mary comes to Rudolf and they make the suicide pact. The top stave is for Mary and the bottom stave is for Rudolf.
Rudolph's position, here he's sitting, and I know he's sitting by the fact that I've written support signs on the hip line, and I've said, therefore, he's supported, and I've written above by what? He's supported by the chair. His body is slumped forward. His head is bent forward, and his upper body is bent forward. His knees are bent in front of him, and his feet are flat on the floor in front of him, and he's facing the front. They dance together for a while, and then Rudolf sees the gun, goes over to the desk, and picks up the gun. This symbol here is showing the stage location. That's really quite far over to the left, and he's facing diagonally downstage. He's standing on his left foot, his right foot is pointed behind him, elbows are bent in front, and his hands are in front of him, just under the shoulder, with the support symbol, meaning that he's holding the gun, and his head is down. At the end of the pas de deux, they're walking around the stage, holding the gun between them. When they get back to the center of the stage, both their heads are lifted, their hands are above their heads. Mary's hand is above her head, holding Rudolph's hand. Rudolph's hand is above his head, and he's also holding the gun.
The third act of Macmillan's Mayerling charts Rudolph's final descent to physical decay, unsound mind, and suicide. At a hunt, he shoots wildly, narrowly missing his father and killing a servant. It's suggested by his enemies at court that Rudolf tried to kill his father. His fathers refused to let him divorce Stephanie or to listen to Rudolph's progressive views on the future of the empire. To dull the pain of his disease, Rudolph's now dependent on morphine. In Macmillan's Mayerling, events now quickly move towards their tragic climax. Countess Lariche again comes to Rudolf. He is in despair and drugged. The Empress is horrified to discover them together and orders the Countess Lariche to leave. The Countess gets her revenge by bringing Mary to Rudolf. And Rudolf finds a partner willing to die with him.
sure that she was terrified when it came to the crunch, but at the same time, I don't think she had anything else to do. There was nothing else in life that was worth doing if she couldn't be with him. And I don't think he loved her particularly, but there was obviously a terrific physical rapport. But their relationship was 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, they only met a few times.
The suicide pact and the suicide wasn't, in fact, the end of the story.
No, it was the beginning of another story, really. And it was this which proved to be my starting point. When I read that after the bodies were found, immediately the bulletins were given out from the court that Rudolf died of a heart attack, not blown his head off. He wouldn't have been able to have had a state burial if he'd committed suicide. Also, the Prime Minister and the Emperor felt that this would be the beginning of the disintegration of the dynasty. Mary was dumped unceremoniously into a linen basket at Mayerling. Then her 2 uncles were told to go and collect the body, but they were told not only to collect it, they were made to dress her as in life and to drive her, seated between them in a carriage, to a monastery 4 miles away at Heiligenkreuz, where she was buried.
Franz Joseph remained emperor for another 27 years, the House of Habsburg falling in 1918, just 2 years after his death. Elizabeth was assassinated with a knife by an Italian anarchist in Geneva in 1898. Stephanie remarried and lived in Hungary until her death in 1945. Mary's mother was ostracized by society and encouraged to stay away from Vienna. The Countess Lariche was banished from court. She was divorced and married again 3 times and wrote a book to clear herself of blame for the tragedy. Bay Middleton died in a fall from his horse. Mitzi Casper and Joseph Bratfish were provided for in Rudolph's will. Mayerling's a magnet for tourists, although there's little left to see. There's a small tower in the grounds, the keeper's lodge, but no one bothers to look at it. Franz Joseph had a chapel erected on the site of the death room. The weeping Madonna, with a knife in her heart, is said to have the face of Rudolph's mother, the Empress Elizabeth. And the couple are said to have died on the bed in a room above where the altar now stands. Mary's grave was desecrated by the Russians in the Second World War, but it's been restored. In his last letter, Rudolf requested that he and Mary should be buried side by side at Heiligenkreuz. This last wish of the Crown Prince Rudolf was ignored.